was that call. I call that telephone call that changed my life. Yes.
So why don't we now move to Allentown, because you had some really interesting experiences, and the important thing I know that you've already made, and I want the audience to hear, is that even while you were engaged in some of those activities that may have been a little questionable, you never really stopped focusing on the education. And so pick up that education piece and how you went on to college, because I think that's a really significant story.
Okay, so I'll keep this brief. When I moved to Allentown, my mother had never finished junior high school, but she was smart enough to know when we went to enroll at Allentown High School, and the tradition at that time, a kid from the South, you put back a grade, and you're kind of encouraged to go on the vocational ed track. But my mother knew that my goal was to go to college. And when the system tried to do that, she protested. And she said, my son wants to go to college. And I don't think vocational ed, she didn't know exactly what it meant, but she knew that it was not a college track. Yeah, and so we succeeded in getting me on that direction. So I think what Joe is referring to is I was a good student, and when I was in 12th grade, we were trying to figure out what to do, what college, if we didn't have any money. My 10th grade English teacher in Florida had identified me as, quote, very smart, and she said, you have to go to Howard University. And I said, where, she said, it's in Washington, D.C. So when I was in 12th grade, and thinking about, and I had gotten into, on the college prep track, there was this, I would call him a community organizer. Even in Allentown at that time, it was still kind of the black section of town and the white section of town. And the black section of town was poor, but we had this gentleman, Mr. Rome, and I would consider him a community organizer. And he came to my mother one day, and he said, I understand your son wants to go to college. And she said, yes, that's right. We had 756 students in the 12th grade at Allentown High. 7 of us were on the college prep track. And Mr. Rome said, there is a lady, a white lady, who has come to me, and she said she would like to help a black student go to college. And she's willing to put up $1,000 a year for the 4 years for a worthy student. So Mr. Rome told my mother, Eddie, they didn't say Eddie Carl, I started saying Eddie Carl, but they said Eddie is basically the most in need. The others are from kind of middle-class families, and financially, they're okay. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to recommend to her that he should be the recipient of your generosity. So he did. At that time, Howard University's tuition, room, and board the tuition, I think, was $106 per semester. $106 per semester, 1957.
Wow.
So,
The audience is saying, wow, given
yeah, so she sent $1,000 all 4 years, not to me, but to the registrar's office or the appropriate folks at Howard for my benefit. And that $1,000 per year paid tuition, room, board, books, everything. So my whole 4 years at Howard was fully paid. And my only regret, one of the many regrets I have in life, is I didn't have sense enough to write to this person. And after being an adult and having a little bit more sense, I tried. Mr. Rowan had passed away. I knew one thing about them from Mr. Rowan is that they own the largest casket company in Allentown. I tried to trace it that way, but obviously, so many years had passed, that business no longer existed. So I was never able to find my benefactor, and that's a big regret.
Eddie, and we can spend a lot of time on your pilgrimage, but I want to get the audience to hear, one, what you majored in and quickly get you into the business that you're in today. So, what you majored in and what led you into the arena that you're in today?
Okay, again, very briefly. When I was graduating from high school, at that time you would take what they call a cooter test. I don't know if they still give those out. Where that name came from. It's kind of to determine what you may be good at. And those test results showed that I was very good at math, science, and the counselor said, I think you should consider going into engineering. So I had no clue, what an engineer did, was, never met one. So when I went to Howard, I said, I'm going to major in engineering. So they said, what? Branch of engineering. I didn't even know that there were branches of engineering. So, growing up, I kind of had hobbies, and one thing I like to do is work on kits, putting electronic stuff together. So I said, maybe electrical, had nothing to do with what I practiced coming up. So I majored in electrical engineering at Howard, and subsequently, skipping a lot of stuff, got a master's in electrical engineering, was at IBM, working as an electrical engineer. You guys, some of the folks in the audience may remember mainframe computers, before the Macs and all of the smaller stuff. So this was a big honor. So I was designing computer circuits of a small group, a technology group at IBM in the systems development division. It was just fascinating work. And along the way, I was able to go at night to New York University. IBM would pay, if you wanted to go, you had to give some of your time, and they would let you take off at equivalent time. So if I went for 3 hours on their time, then I have to do at least 3 hours in the evening on my time. So over 3 years, I was able to get a master's in electrical engineering. And what I hadn't figured out is what a career is. But I reached the level of senior engineer by year 4 or 5, and I started talking to my manager, and I said, I'm just curious, how did you get to be a manager? And he told me, and so I said, would you mind if I talk to your manager to find out how he got to be where he is? The short version, I ended up going to the head of the whole systems development division in Poughkeepsie, New York. Through many layers, this gentleman had probably 2,500, 3,000 people ultimately that he was responsible for. It was a massive technology operation. And he said, well, IBM was a very large company. At that time, IBM had, I think, 250,000 employees worldwide. He said, but what I would like to do, as you think through now kind of a career, he said, there are kind of two paths at IBM. One is you could stay purely technical and progress up the managerial ranks, or you could go the managerial path. General management, not just managing technical people. And he said, if you're interested in that, I would like to introduce you to a friend of mine in the marketing division down in White Plains, New York. Lars Lenovsky. So I did that, and I'm shortening this a lot, but Lars said, Eddie, IBM is a great company. In fact, at that time, it's one of the greatest technology companies in the world. But the real strength and magic that makes IBM really great is sales and marketing. And if you really want to advance at a faster rate, I would suggest combining that technical background with sales and marketing. And before you do that, I would suggest getting a master's in business administration, combining your technical degrees with the MBA. And if you decide to do that, between your first and second year, you have a position. He was head of marketing for IBM. You have a position here, and then we'll figure it out on a path up to managerial ranks. So that was the plan when I went back, which I did, to Indiana University. It's now called Kelley School of Business, to pursue the MBA. And short-circuiting a lot of things in the path, I had an unbelievable opportunity in my second year of business school. A good friend of mine had gone to work for a firm that managed the wealth of the wealthiest family at that time in the state of Indiana. It was a J. Irvin Miller family called Urban Management. That family had founded what's now called Cummins Inc. It was called Cummins Engine Company at one point. They had foundations. They just had a family office. So, this gentleman happens to be African American, was a classmate of mine, graduated the year before, told the second in command about me and said, you should really meet this guy. And so the vice president, second in command of urban management, called me and said, I'd like to have dinner. And we had dinner over in Bloomington, Indiana. This firm was based in Columbus, Indiana, 35 miles away. And I guess he must have liked something. He said, I'd like to invite you over to visit our offices in Columbus. And I did. So what I realized is that, and I've taken, in addition to marketing, also finance courses in graduate business school. I've been investing personally in the stock market for years just as a hobby. And what I discovered is people can make huge amounts of money on something called Wall Street, which I never focused on. So anyway, the end result was after several visits to these offices in Columbus, Indiana, they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And I ended up basically switching careers. I never went back to IBM. I went into a completely different direction and basically never looked back.
So quickly fast forward to your days at T. Rowe Price, and just briefly tell them the role that you were in at T. Rowe Price, and then we're going to exit you quickly out of T. Rowe Price to get you into Brown Capital.
Yeah, there is Brown Capital. 36 years, July 1st of 2019. So, I had, for as long as I can remember, had an interest in investing in the market just as a hobby, as I said, but also a bent or a bias towards investing in growth companies. And I was trying to explain to our daughters as they were growing up the difference between a value style manager and a growth style manager. And as I explained it, they said, well, why wouldn't everyone want to invest in growth stocks? There's different styles, different strokes for different folks. But the reason that's significant is I had read about this gentleman, T. Rowe Price, the man, who was kind of the founder of the growth stock theory of investing. And I said, boy, maybe I should try to get some relationships at the Mecca. And I reached out to, they only had one office, Baltimore, Maryland. And I, wrote them resume, how much I admired, the philosophy and T. Rowe Price, the man, and so forth. And I got an invite, to my surprise, to come for an interview. And the way it generally works in these types of firms in Wall Street generally is it's not one interview or two interviews, three, it's multiple interviews with a lot of different people and so forth. So after several visits, they made me an offer. I couldn't refuse. The other thing is at Urban Management, the reason I decided to look is the kingpin of the family, J. Irwin Miller, had mandatory retirement age of 65 for all of their entities, whether it's the family office, Urban Management, whether it's the largest bank at that time in southern Indiana, Urban Union Bank and Trust, or whether it's Cummins Engine Company. That was it. 65, you must retire. Being kind of a person that looked, many years ahead, in 1973, J. Irwin was 63. And I said to myself, what are the chances of this gentleman wanting 85 people on the family's payroll just to oversee their wealth, 45 of which were all MBAs. 2 of us were anomalies. All the other MBAs were from the 3 top business schools at that time, Harvard, Stanford, Wharton. Clarence Malone, who introduced me and myself, were the only ones not from one of those institutions. So the idea of being able to come to the Mecca, when I got the offer, and with J. Irwin being 63, not knowing what would happen 2 years down the road, whether they want, those people just working for the family. So I got the offer, I came to Baltimore. What I didn't know is that at that point, T. Rowe Price had never had an African American in a professional position. Never. The firm was founded in 1937. Wow. 1937. And I give T. Rowe Price credit publicly, and I'll do it every time I mention it. There was no pressure, to hire an African American. And I concluded that money is green. And firms are interested in talent. And in certain arenas, color doesn't, it doesn't really matter. So I give them a lot of credit for basically doing something that they didn't have to do when they hired me, as the first African American professional at that point. So that's how I got to Baltimore.
So you had quick success.
Let me just mention one thing. Judge Murphy, Billy Murphy's father, and Billy is coming next, right? I think.
Billy's next.
Yeah. When I got to Baltimore, somehow he found me and he called me and came to my office. Billy's sister, one of his sisters, is very much into art. She's an art consultant. She lives in Chicago, Madeline Rand. And he looked around my office and he said, "Eddie, you just have all these blank walls. You need some art." So I got a call from his daughter, and we started a relationship, and that's how I got into collecting art.
Well, we're going to come to that shortly, quickly, but here's what I want to do. I want to have you, one, quickly share, though, how successful you were with T. Rowe Price, and why and what was the catalyst. What happened with Eddie that said, I can do more for myself under my own name?
Okay, to that early start and my uncle having always worked for himself, and he had planted, without my knowing it, an entrepreneurial seed and desire. But I say, as I looked at, especially African-American-owned businesses, and why did the ones fail that failed, I can talk about some of that at another time, but I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur from that early upbringing. But I think to be a successful entrepreneur, you should have several things. First of all, the right educational background for whatever that thing is that you want to do as an entrepreneur. So I've gotten the pieces, the MBA, and then you need some experience, preferably on someone else's payroll, to get bona fide, marketable experience. So by that time, I had 3 years of urban management and financial side of the business. I had 10 years at T. Rowe Price. So I think, and I had the right credentials educationally, and then I had bona fide, good experience with recognizable brands or names in this very tough business of managing other people's money. Then I said, you need capital, but not borrowed capital from Harvard Bank.
Shame on you.
You need enough capital to last at least 5 years without an income. And at T. Rowe Price at that time, they had a mandatory retirement age of 55. And they basically said, look, if you haven't become wealthy enough by that time, too bad. You have to go. We want to make room for some young tigers. And so they had very good compensation. They had stock ownership possibilities if you were good at what you did. So I said, boy, now 13 years, I have the credentials, I have the work experience, and with accumulating some stock in the firm, and hopefully managing some of our own money very well, I said, I think I almost had it together. I think I could go 5 years, be able to feed my family, pay the mortgage, started college education funds for our 2 daughters when they were born. So college education was all funded. So I said, I think I have it. The other important piece, if you're married, is a spouse that's willing for that journey of entrepreneurship. On those bad days, you come home, you want someone who's going to be supportive and give you encouragement, when things are not going well. So I had all of the pieces, and in 1983, after being at T. Rowe for 10 years, I said, I'm going to give up. And I had stock, I did say that, didn't I? But then, I hit the jackpot in 1986, 3 years after being out, and I had 2 more years of personal capital left. T. Rowe Price went public. And that set a whole different level of financial capacity for the stock. So anyway, that was the journey I always knew I wanted to do it, and I had to kind of check all of those boxes to be able to do it. And I said, what's the worst? Many good friends, Joe was not among them at the time, thought I was absolutely insane. A good job, vice president of T. Rowe Price. You're going to leave and do what? 0 assets under management, 0 income, and just a lot of grit. And, I said, the other part of being a good entrepreneur is being a risk taker. And I said, I am a a risk taker, but I only take calculated risk. And I said, what's the worst case? The worst case is it doesn't work. I've expended a good portion of our net worth. I've given it my best, and it didn't work. But I said, I'm going to start in my early 40s, which was the other incentive to do it when I did, besides all of those other boxes. Because if it doesn't work, I had enough confidence in myself that I can always get a job. So worst case, I've expended a good portion of our net worth, I've given it my best, it didn't work, I can get a job. So that's not a big risk, it might, but our friends thought we were nuts.
And we questioned, and this is, I just want you to give this number because I want to get you over to some of the philanthropic things that you're doing today, but tell them what you require in terms of an initial investment with you, because that's when we thought you were nuts, some of us. But,
well, let's put it this way. One vision that I still have is we don't want to be a T. Rowe Price. We don't want to try to be a Goliath. And for those of you that might have a little gray hair, when I came to T. Rowe Price in 1973, T. Rowe Price had 120 employees. It had a little over $6 billion total assets under management. T. Rowe Price today, they have over 6,000 employees in many countries around the world, offices in many countries. Just crossed a quarter or two ago, $1 trillion in assets under management. So it was quite a different place. What was the question, Joe?
the question is, I want you to tell them, so if they wanted to open an account with Brown Capital, when you launch your operation, what amount did they need?
Okay. When I started Brown Capital, 1973, my business plan was on one sheet of paper. First bullet point was to get clients, because we get a small percent of the dollars that we manage. If you don't have any clients with assets under management, that small percent times zero is zero. So I said, okay, I'm going to start. Most money managers have a very large minimum. I'm going to start with $250,000. I'm going to open up the broadest possible market for private management services. Of course, there are mutual funds for a few $1,000s in investment mutual funds. But this is kind of one-on-one, private client, personal service, tailoring a portfolio for your specific objectives and needs. But the trap on that, if I don't want to be a huge firm with 100, 200 people, then for the business model to work, after you get a few clients, you're going to have to increase the minimum if you don't want to be a large number of clients, which means a lot of people. So within a few months, I'll go through how I got my first 4 clients. But I increased it to 500,000. And then a year or so later, we increased it to $1 million. And a few years after that, we increased it to $5 million, which is where we have been for probably 25 years.
And we lost our friendship at 250.
But here's the magic of this business. I think Reginald Lewis, I never met Reginald Lewis, but I think he said he loves the kind of business where you can make money while you're sleeping. Isn't that what he said? Mm-hmm. So, we now, since 1988, have managed money internationally, not just domestic type companies, but around the globe. So, there are markets all hours of the night and so forth. So the idea is, as you grow and you get this small percent, so law of large numbers. For example, think about this. the end of last year, Brown Capital Management, between separate accounts, that's a private relationship, and our 4 mutual funds that anyone in this audience can invest in, because minimums are a few $1,000s. We had, at the end of last year, about $10 billion total assets under management, from zero. But think about what happens with large numbers. And we have had some inflows into our mutual funds. We have gotten some new clients. The market, stock market, first quarter is up over 20%. 20% of 10 billion is $2 billion without lifting a finger. I mean, it's just an incredible business.
I forgot.
But it works both ways. Market goes down 20%. So it works up and it works down. So we try to smooth it up.
Yeah, but you were wise enough to work through the down times. And the interesting part, and just for some of the younger people, people don't know that Eddie really is a mathematician. So those calculus came very easy to him. So he was able to discern what risk levels he could take and feel comfortable and still take care of his family.
May I mention one, I was interviewed last year, I don't think it's been aired yet, for CNBC Forbes Africa. It's televised on the continent, and it's supposed to be the largest audience watching financial services program. And these people came in and they wanted to tape it. I don't think it's been shown yet. They said it'll be shown in 2019. But they chose a few African Americans because they did the same thing of fairly wealthy Africans on the continent. But these folks were billionaires. And then they said there's some interesting views of African Americans on the continent. And we want to